What happens when one of the most talked about figures in the world walks into a morning show interview and completely loses control? In just 36 seconds, everything falls apart. A simple question, a shocking response, and an interview that goes from cordial to catastrophic in the blink of an eye. This is the story of how Prince Harry got kicked off the Today Show after a heated clash with Savannah Guthrie that nobody saw coming. It started like any other morning on the Today Show. The studio lights were bright, the cameras were rolling, and Savannah Guthrie sat across from Prince Harry with her notes prepared and a welcoming smile on her face. This was supposed to be a straightforward interview, a chance for the prince to discuss his latest charitable work and connect with the American audience. But within minutes, the entire interview would spiral into chaos. Savannah began with a warm greeting. "Your Royal Highness, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're really excited to have you here." Prince Harry nodded, but his expression was already tense. "Thank you for having me," he replied, his tone clipped and formal. Savannah continued, keeping things light. "I want to start by talking about your recent work with veterans. You've been such an advocate for mental health support. Can you tell our viewers what inspired this particular initiative?" The prince shifted in his seat. "Well, as you know, I served in the military. I've seen firsthand what soldiers go through. It's something that matters deeply to me." "Absolutely," Savannah said, nodding encouragingly. "And I think a lot of people appreciate the work you're doing. Now, I do want to ask you about something that's been in the news recently. There have been some reports about tensions within your family. I know it's a sensitive topic, but our viewers are curious. How are you handling all of that?" The question was fair, polite even, but the prince's face changed immediately. His jaw tightened, and he leaned forward in his chair. "I think that's really none of your business, actually." Savannah, ever the professional, kept her composure. "I understand it's personal, and I respect that. But you've spoken publicly about family matters before, so I thought it might be something you'd be willing to discuss. What I choose to share, and when I choose to share it, is up to me." Prince Harry shot back. "Not you, not this show, not anyone else." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop. Savannah maintained her calm demeanor, but there was a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Of course, and I completely respect your privacy. I'm just trying to have an open conversation." "An open conversation?" The prince let out a bitter laugh. "Is that what you call this? Ambushing me with invasive questions? I don't think asking about something you've discussed in other interviews constitutes an ambush," Savannah replied gently. "But if you'd prefer to talk about something else, we can absolutely do that." Prince Harry crossed his arms. "You know what? I don't think I want to talk about anything with you. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You people in the media, you just can't help yourselves, can you?" Savannah's expression remained neutral, but her voice carried a hint of firmness. "I'm sorry you feel that way. We invited you here to share your story and your work. That's all we're trying to do. We've had hundreds of guests on this show, and I've never had an interaction quite like this one." "Maybe that's because your other guests don't have the courage to call you out," the prince retorted. "Or maybe it's because they understand how interviews work," Savannah replied calmly. "They understand that questions are part of the process, and they handle them with grace, even when the questions are difficult. No, what you're trying to do is get a soundbite. Something sensational you can plaster all over the news cycle. I've seen this game before, and I'm not playing it." "With all due respect," Savannah said, her professionalism unwavering, "I've been doing this job for a long time. I'm not interested in games. I'm interested in having honest conversations with my guests. That's what I do every single day on this show. And most people appreciate that approach." "Most people don't have their every word twisted and turned into something it's not," the prince shot back. "I haven't twisted anything," Savannah said. "You're reacting to a straightforward question as if I've committed some terrible offense. I really don't understand where this hostility is coming from," the prince scoffed. "Honest? You wouldn't know honest if it hit you in the face." A stunned silence fell over the studio. The crew members behind the cameras exchanged glances. This was not how interviews were supposed to go, especially not on a morning show known for its friendly, approachable atmosphere. Savannah took a breath, clearly choosing her words carefully. "I'm not sure what you mean by that, but I think we should try to refocus this conversation. You came here to talk about your charity work, and I think that's something our viewers would really love to hear more about." "Oh, now you want to talk about my charity work?" Prince Harry said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "After you've already tried to drag me through the mud? I haven't dragged anyone through anything, Savannah replied, her patience beginning to show its limits. I asked you one question about your family, which is a topic you've addressed publicly before. That's part of journalism. Journalism? The prince laughed again, harsher this time. Is that what you call this tabloid nonsense? Savannah's expression hardened slightly. I take my work very seriously, and I don't appreciate being compared to a tabloid. We're trying to have a respectful interview here. The Today Show has been on the air for decades. We have standards, we have integrity, and we treat our guests with respect even when they're not returning that courtesy. Respect has to be earned, Prince Harry said coldly. I agree, Savannah replied. And I think I've earned it through years of professional, fair journalism. What have you done in the last 10 minutes to earn my respect? Because from where I'm sitting, you've been nothing but hostile and accusatory. Respectful? Prince Harry leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. You have no idea what respect means. You sit here in your comfortable studio, asking your intrusive questions, and you think you're being respectful? I think I've been more than respectful, Savannah said, her voice steady but firm. I've given you every opportunity to steer this conversation in a direction you're comfortable with. You know what your problem is? The prince said, pointing a finger at her. You think you're entitled to know everything about everyone. You think just because someone is in the public eye, you have the right to pry into every corner of their life. Savannah remained composed. I think there's a difference between asking relevant questions and prying. And I think most people would agree that I've been quite fair with you today. Fair? Prince Harry stood up abruptly, the microphone clipped to his jacket, pulling at its cord. You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about how the media has treated me and my family for years. Let's talk about the lies, the distortions, the absolute invasion of privacy. Those are certainly valid concerns, Savannah said, trying to de-escalate the situation. And I think a lot of people would be interested in hearing your perspective on that. But I'm not responsible for what other journalists have done. You're all the same, the prince said dismissively. You all think you're different, but you're not. You're all just looking for the next big story, the next controversy. Savannah's patience was clearly wearing thin, but she kept her professional mask firmly in place. I understand you're upset, but I don't think it's fair to lump all journalists together. We're having a conversation here, just the two of us. A conversation? Prince Harry's voice rose. This isn't a conversation. This is an interrogation. I've asked you 2 questions, Savannah pointed out, her tone becoming sharper. One about your charity work, which you barely answered, and one about your family, which you refused to answer. That's hardly an interrogation. Oh, so now you're keeping score? The prince shot back. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You twist everything. I'm not twisting anything, Savannah said firmly. I'm simply stating facts. Prince Harry took a step toward the camera, his face flushed with anger. You know what? I'm done with this. I'm done with you. I'm done with this show, and I'm done with this whole circus. You're certainly welcome to leave if you'd like, Savannah said calmly. But I think you're overreacting to a pretty standard interview. Standard? The prince's voice cracked with frustration. There's nothing standard about this. You ambushed me, you disrespected me, and now you're acting like I'm the one being unreasonable. Savannah shook her head slowly. I have to disagree with that characterization. I welcomed you onto our show. I asked you respectful questions, and I've tried to accommodate your concerns. If anyone has been disrespectful here, I don't think it's been me. The prince's face turned a deeper shade of red. How dare you? How dare you sit there and lecture me about respect? I'm not lecturing you, Savannah replied, her voice still controlled. I'm defending myself against accusations that I don't think are fair. Not fair? Prince Harry laughed bitterly. You want to talk about fair? Nothing about this is fair. Nothing about my life has been fair since the day I was born. I understand you face challenges, Savannah said, her tone softening. Slightly, but that doesn't give you the right to come on our show and attack me personally. Attack you? The prince's eyes widened. Are you serious right now? You started this whole thing with your invasive questions, and now you're playing the victim? Savannah's expression hardened. I asked you a question that was directly relevant to your public life. That's my job. If you can't handle that, then maybe you shouldn't agree to do interviews. Maybe I shouldn't, Prince Harry snapped. Maybe I should just stop trying to explain myself to people like you who have already made up their minds about me. I haven't made up my mind about anything, Savannah said. I came into this interview with an open mind and a genuine interest in what you had to say. but you've been hostile from the moment I asked you anything remotely challenging." The prince threw his hands up. "Challenging? You call that challenging? That's not challenging. That's attacking." "It was a question," Savannah said, her voice rising slightly for the first time. "A simple question, and you've turned it into this whole dramatic spectacle." "I've turned it into a spectacle?" Prince Harry pointed at her again. "You're the one who asked the question. You're the one who started this. And you're the one who's completely overreacted," Savannah countered. "I've interviewed thousands of people over my career, politicians, celebrities, world leaders, and I can honestly say this is one of the most unprofessional responses I've ever witnessed." The prince's face contorted with anger. "Unprofessional? You're calling me unprofessional? That's rich coming from someone who makes a living tearing people down on television." "I don't tear people down," Savannah said sharply. "I ask questions. That's what journalists do. And if you can't distinguish between the two, then that's your problem, not mine." "My problem?" Prince Harry's voice was getting louder. "My problem is that I'm sitting here, across from someone who clearly has no respect for boundaries, no respect for privacy, and no respect for me as a human being." Savannah leaned forward slightly. "I have plenty of respect for you as a human being. What I don't have respect for is the way you're behaving right now. You're being rude, you're being dismissive, and you're making wild accusations that have no basis in reality." "No basis in reality?" The prince let out an incredulous laugh. "Everything I've said is true. You ambushed me, you disrespected me, and now you're gaslighting me into thinking I'm the one at fault here." "Nobody's gaslighting you," Savannah said firmly. "I'm simply pointing out that your reaction is completely disproportionate to what actually happened." Prince Harry stepped even closer to the desk between them. "You have no idea what it's like to be constantly scrutinized, constantly judged, constantly picked apart by people like you." "You're right, I don't," Savannah acknowledged. "But I do. Know what it's like to be accused of things I didn't do. And that's what you're doing to me right now." "I'm not accusing you of anything you didn't do," the prince said through gritted teeth. "You asked an invasive question. That's a fact. It was a question about something you've discussed publicly," Savannah repeated. "That's also a fact." The prince shook his head violently. "Just because I've talked about something before doesn't mean I have to talk about it with you, on your terms, whenever you feel like asking." "Of course not," Savannah agreed. "And I told you that if you didn't want to discuss it, we could move on. But instead of moving on, you've spent the last several minutes attacking me. Because you deserve it." Prince Harry spat out. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Even the crew members seemed to freeze. Savannah's face remained composed, but there was a steeliness in her eyes now. "I don't think I deserve to be spoken to this way," she said, quietly but firmly. "Not by you, not by anyone." "Well, maybe if you didn't ask such terrible questions, you wouldn't be spoken to this way," the prince retorted. Savannah took a visible breath, clearly working to maintain her composure. "I think we need to end this interview." "Oh, now you want to end it?" Prince Harry said mockingly. "Now that you've gotten what you wanted? Now that you've made me look bad? You've made yourself look bad?" Savannah said, her voice cutting through the tension. "I've done nothing but try to conduct a professional interview. You're the one who's been combative and disrespectful from the start." The prince leaned across the desk, his face inches from Savannah's. "You know what your real problem is? You can't stand the fact that I'm not going to play your little game. You can't stand that I'm not going to sit here and smile and pretend like everything's fine when it's not." Savannah didn't flinch. "My problem is that you agreed to come on this Compass show, and now you're acting like I've committed some terrible crime by doing my job." "Your job is to exploit people," Prince Harry said venomously. "That's what you do. That's what all of you do." "That's not true, and you know it," Savannah replied, her voice steady despite the obvious provocation. "But at this point, I don't think anything I say is going to change your mind." "You're right about that," the prince agreed. "Nothing you say matters because you've already shown me exactly who you are." Savannah looked directly into the camera, then back at Prince Harry. "I think it's time for you to leave." "Oh, I'm leaving," Prince Harry said, reaching up to unclip his microphone. "Trust me, I can't get out of here fast enough." "Then I won't keep you," Savannah said coolly. The prince yanked the microphone off his jacket with more force than necessary, nearly pulling the battery pack off his belt. He tossed the equipment onto the desk between them, the small thud echoing in the now silent studio. "You know what?" Prince Harry said, his voice shaking with anger. "You're everything that's wrong with journalism today. You're invasive, you're manipulative, and you're completely devoid of any real empathy or understanding." Savannah's jaw tightened. "And you're someone who clearly can't handle even the most basic level of accountability. You want to be in the public eye, you want to share your story, but the moment someone asks you a question you don't like, you throw a tantrum." "A tantrum?" The prince's voice rose to a near shout. "This isn't a tantrum. This is me standing up for myself against people like you who think they can say whatever they want and face no consequences." "I haven't said anything that warrants this reaction," Savannah said, her voice hardening. "But you know what? I'm done trying to reason with you. Security can show you out." Prince Harry's eyes blazed. "I don't need security to show me anywhere. I'm perfectly capable of finding my own way out." "Then please do," Savannah said, gesturing toward the exit. The prince stared at her for a long moment, his chest heaving with barely controlled rage. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and threatening. "People are going to hear about this. They're going to know how you treated me." "I'm sure they will," Savannah said calmly. "And they're going to see exactly what happened here. The cameras have been rolling this entire time." For a moment, Prince Harry seemed to register what that meant. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, then anger, then something close to panic, before settling back into defiance. "Good," he said finally. "Let them see. Let them see how you journalists really operate." "I think they'll see a journalist trying to do her job and a guest who completely lost control," Savannah replied evenly. Prince Harry opened his mouth as if to say something else, then seemed to think better of it. He turned on his heel and strode toward the studio exit, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. The crew members parted to let him through, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Just before he reached the door, the prince turned back one last time. "You haven't heard the last of this," he called out across the studio. Savannah met his gaze steadily. "I'm sure I haven't," she said. "Have a good day." Prince Harry's face flushed an even deeper red. Without another word, he shoved open the studio door and disappeared through it, leaving behind a stunned silence. For a moment, nobody moved. The crew stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Savannah sat at the desk, her hands folded in front of her, her expression carefully neutral. Then, slowly, she looked into the camera. "Well," she said, her voice remarkably steady, "that was certainly unexpected." One of the producers approached her, speaking in a low voice. Savannah nodded, listening, then turned back to the camera. "We're going to take a quick break," she announced to the viewers. "When we come back, we'll have our cooking segment with some delicious fall recipes." The studio lights dimmed slightly as they cut to commercial. Savannah removed her own microphone and stood up from the desk, stretching slightly. Around her, the crew began to murmur, their voices gradually rising as they processed what had just happened. The interview that was supposed to be a friendly conversation about charity work had devolved into a spectacular clash of wills. Savannah Guthrie, the seasoned professional, had remained calm and composed throughout the entire ordeal, never raising her voice, never losing her temper. Even as Prince Harry had become increasingly aggressive and hostile, she had asked a fair question, one that any journalist would have asked given the circumstances. The prince's reaction had been completely out of proportion, turning what should have been a minor moment in the interview into a full-blown confrontation. His accusations, his personal attacks, his complete inability to handle even gentle pushback, all of it had played out on live television for millions of viewers to witness. As Savannah made her way off the set, she maintained her professional demeanor, thanking crew members and checking in with her producers. But there was no mistaking the intensity of what had just occurred. Prince Harry had come on to the Today Show expecting, what? Softball questions? Uncritical praise? Whatever he had expected, he clearly hadn't been prepared for even the most basic form of journalistic inquiry. The contrast between the two couldn't have been more stark. Savannah, poised and professional, handling an increasingly difficult situation with grace and firmness. Prince Harry, volatile and entitled, lashing out at the first sign of a challenging question. She had tried repeatedly to de-escalate, to redirect the conversation, to give him opportunities to compose himself. He had rejected every olive branch, instead choosing to escalate his attacks, to make wild accusations, to turn a simple interview into a battleground. In the end, it was his choice to leave, though Savannah had certainly made it clear that his behavior was unacceptable. The way he had torn off his microphone, the way he had leaned across the desk threateningly, The way he had pointed fingers and raised his voice, all of it spoke to someone who had completely lost control of himself. The studio was still buzzing with activity as crew members discussed what they had just witnessed. Some were checking the footage, making sure everything had been captured. Others were on their phones, no doubt alerting their supervisors to what had happened. And through it all, Savannah moved with calm efficiency, preparing for the next segment as if nothing unusual had occurred. That was the mark of a true professional. She hadn't let Prince Harry's behavior throw her off her game. She hadn't responded to his provocations with anger of her own. She had simply stated facts, defended herself when necessary, and ultimately ended the interview when it became clear that productive conversation was impossible. As the commercial break came to an end, Savannah was back in her seat, her makeup touched up, her smile back in place. To anyone just tuning in, there would be no sign that anything extraordinary had just occurred. That was how she handled it, with professionalism, with dignity, and with an unwavering commitment to her job. The cooking segment began, and Savannah chatted cheerfully with the chef about autumn ingredients and holiday preparation. But even as she smiled and asked about roasting techniques and seasoning tips, the weight of what had just happened hung in the air. The crew was still processing it. The producers were already fielding calls. And somewhere outside the studio, Prince Harry was presumably still fuming about an interview that he had single-handedly destroyed. What made the whole thing even more remarkable was how avoidable it all was. Savannah had started the interview on the friendliest possible terms. She had welcomed him warmly, complimented his work, and set up what should have been an easy first question about veterans and mental health. The prince had given a brief, somewhat curt answer, but nothing that would have raised any red flags. It was only when Savannah asked about his family, a topic that was undeniably newsworthy and one that he had discussed in previous interviews, that everything began to unravel. A reasonable person would have simply said something like, "I'd prefer to keep that private today," or "I'm really here to focus on my charity work." That would have been the end of it. Savannah would have moved on, and the interview would have continued smoothly. But Prince Harry hadn't chosen the reasonable path. He had chosen confrontation. He had immediately accused her of invasiveness, of ambushing him, of being part of some monolithic media conspiracy against him. And from that point forward, every attempt Savannah made to de-escalate was met with more hostility, more accusations, more personal attacks. The irony was that he had agreed to do the interview in the first place. Nobody had forced him to come on the Today Show. Nobody had tricked him into sitting down across from Savannah Guthrie. He had accepted the invitation, knowing full well that interviews involve questions, and that some of those questions might touch on topics that were uncomfortable or challenging. But in studios and living rooms and offices across the country, people were already talking about what they had just seen. The interview that had gone so spectacularly wrong. The prince who had lost his composure, the host who had kept hers. It was a moment that would be replayed and analyzed for days to come. Every word would be scrutinized, every gesture examined. And through it all, the footage would show the same thing. A host trying to do her job and a guest who couldn't handle it. A professional maintaining her composure and an entitled figure throwing it all away. A simple question that should have been easy to answer or deflect, and a reaction so explosive that it ended with the guest storming off the set. The contrast was striking. Savannah had years of experience handling difficult interviews. She had spoken with politicians who dodged questions, celebrities who got defensive, and public figures who tried to control the narrative. But she had never, in all her years of broadcasting, seen someone react quite this way to such a mild line of questioning. It wasn't just that Prince Harry had been defensive, it was that he had been aggressive, accusatory, and completely unwilling to engage in good faith. The 36 seconds it took for everything to fall apart would become one of the most talked about moments in morning television history. Not because of what Savannah Guthrie had done, but because of what Prince Harry had revealed about himself. His inability to handle even mild scrutiny, his tendency to lash out when challenged, his complete lack of self-awareness about how his behavior would be perceived. Savannah had given him every opportunity to recover, to regroup, to turn the interview around. He had refused them all, choosing instead to double down on his anger, to escalate his attacks, to burn every bridge in the room. And in doing so, he had shown millions of viewers exactly who he was when things didn't go his way. The host had been the hero of this story, maintaining her professionalism in the face of unprecedented hostility. The guest had been the villain, revealing himself to be someone who demanded respect but refused to give it, who wanted his story told but only on his terms, who couldn't distinguish between fair questions and personal attacks. He had shown a complete lack of self-control and an inability to engage in civil discourse. In the end, it wasn't about who won or lost. It was about who kept their dignity and who lost it. And that answer was crystal clear.